My name is Ira Sirkar Harrod. I'm the Sufi Director or Counselor for the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council, and which is the sponsor or the organizer of this event. And so we welcome you to Exercising Indigenous Wisdom for Responses to the Climate Crisis, Embodied Knowledges at Work Exercising Indigenuity. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce Stacy Davis, who is the manager of the Discovery Center here.
Good morning, afternoon, everyone. It's been a long day. Again, I am the manager here at the Anita Gorman Conservation Discovery Center. If you are new to the Discovery Center, we are part of the Missouri Department of Conservation. So we are our urban nature center, and I was so excited to have the speaker here today because it paired so well with the special event that we were doing as well, which is all about native plants and how native plants can help our urban environment and help, the wildlife, help the climate crisis out in your own little piece of the world. But the big picture of what we do here at the Gorman Discovery Center is just connecting people with nature here in the city. So that is everything from our little bitties classes for the little ones to things that families can learn together. We do a lot of adult programming, and everything that we offer is free. So if you don't know about us already, stop by the front desk whenever you're done. But also, since today, we were giving away native tree seedlings and plant seedlings. If you did not get a chance to get one before you came in, our event officially wraps up at 2. So whenever you're done here, anything we have left will be in the lobby. So, grab something to plant at your house when you go home today to help in your little piece of the world of making nature just a little bit better here in Kansas City. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stacy. And I would comment that the Missouri Department of Conservation and the Discovery Center has provided this space for us at no charge and has been very helpful in organizing the logistics here. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are holding this meeting on traditional and ancestral land of Native Americans and Indigenous peoples, taken by European Americans. We ask you to join us in a moment of silence, acknowledging the many tribes and groups who once lived here or still do. These people include the Osage, Kaw, Missouri, Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandot tribes, and others. We honor the wisdom of these people and seek to learn from their examples for living in harmony with the life around us and to become better stewards of the land that we occupy. So just take a moment, please. Thank you. The Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council is comprised of faith counselors who belong to 22 distinct faith philosophies represented in the Kansas City area, all of whom are passionate about multi-faith understanding. The council strives to provide engaging and educational programs about these diverse faiths and works to increase multi-faith understanding and cooperation. Among the council's goals is to make the community more aware of the spiritual values that can help resolve issues related to environmental degradation, the climate crisis, and other challenges facing society. We believe that almost all of the world's faith traditions hold sacred humans' relationship with creation. Our diverse scriptures urge us to take care of creation, to see God's grandeur and presence in nature, and to be thankful for the bounty God has given us. I invite you to see a collection of these some of these faith statements about care for creation and the climate crisis at the Interfaith Council's table in the Lewis room. Before introducing today's workshop and speaker, I would like to thank some of the groups and individuals who have helped make this workshop possible. As I've already mentioned, we thank the Missouri Department of Conservation and the Anita Gorman Discovery Center. In addition to Stacy Davis, the center manager, I also want to extend my thanks to Elaine Barkley for providing this auditorium space and logistic support. I want to thank the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City for organizing the 2025 Earth Festival, of which this program is a part, and special thanks to Bob Grove, president of the Climate Council, for helping with the live streaming of this workshop. And information about EarthFest activities can be found at climatekc.org. And many thanks to the members of the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council planning committee that worked on this event, and other volunteers, including Bennett Siemens, Reverend Matt Silvers, Reverend Sherry Johnson, Melissa Heil, Susan Nakow, Reverend Michael Stevens, Geneva Blackmere, and Barb McAtee and Dean Olson. And we want to thank all of our co-sponsors, the Missouri Department of Conservation and the Discovery Center, Climate Council of KC, Bridging the Gap, Kansas City Indian Center, Resilient Activist, Heartland Conservation Alliance, Sustainable Sanctuary, Peaceworks, Buttrey Center for Peace and Nonviolence. And I invite you after the workshop to go to the table at the Lewis Room down the hall and check out the information they have brought about their work. In past years, the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council has organized Earth Day forums providing understanding and information about multiple faiths' teachings on caring for nature and responding to the climate crisis. This year, we decided to provide an opportunity for participants to gain a deeper understanding of indigenuity, a word that some of you may not have heard before, but basically it's indigenous wisdom derived from a millennia of careful mindfulness and attentiveness to place, and the recognition that land, water, air, and all life on Mother Earth are relatives, not resources. Our hope is that in this workshop, we will find ways to use this knowledge to respond to the climate crisis and help inspire, in the words of our speaker, climate cultural change. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Daniel Wildcat here with us to share his decades of knowledge, experience, and insights. Dr. Wildcat of the Yuchi, Muscogee, excuse my pronunciation if that's not correct, tribal nations, is a faculty member in an Indigenous and American Indian Studies program at Haskell Indian Nations University. He currently leads the National Science Foundation funded Rising Voices Changing Coasts Hub at Haskell University. The program brings together university-trained scientists and traditional knowledge holders to provide local communities with the information they need to take action in the face of the climate crisis and protect their lifeways. He is author and editor of several books, including Red Alert, Saving the Planet with Indigenous Knowledge, and On Indigenuity, Learning the Lessons of Mother Earth. These books are available in the Lewis and Clark Room for sale. And again, I thank Stacy Davis for allowing us to sell these books under a special contract with the center. The format of our workshop will include comments by Dr. Wildcat, some questions and answer, discussion, moving into small group discussion, and then reconvening to hear what the groups have learned and also to hear more from Dr. Wildcat. So for the live streaming audience, the streaming will end when we break into small groups and then reconvene when we come back together. Just before we end the session, we'll alert you about when to expect us to start streaming again. We think that the small group activities will be about 20 or 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. With all of that said, I want to thank Dr. Wildcat for being with us and sharing his knowledge, and I turn it over to Dr. Wildcat.
Sanlai Koyasate. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Ira, and thank you to all the folks with the Kansas City Interfaith Council and all the cooperating and collaborating organizations that made this visit possible today. So I'll start by saying, Fasan, Sangele, Zoyaha, Yuchi, Muscogee, Shadane, Adane. Good afternoon, beautiful people. My name is Dan Wildcat, and I am a Zoyaha, a Yuchi member of the Muscogee Nation of Oklahoma, often referred to as Creek Nation. But the Zoyaha are not Creeks, not culturally. We were politically a part of the Creek Confederacy at the time of removal on the Trail of Tears from our ancestral homes in Georgia. So after my ancestors who survived that brutal removal process, after they arrived in Oklahoma and they did a head count of survivors and a list of who had made that journey. I was fortunate because the translator identified my grandfather, great-grandfather, by a clan totem. So Wildcat is an important clan totem for the Yuchi, and almost all of our totems really come from our relatives in the natural world. The deer, the turtle, most importantly, the wind is an important clan for both the Creeks and the Zoyaha, the Yuchi people. So yeah, I like to jokingly tell everyone I'm a member of a federally misrecognized tribe. And that's not the first thing the government's gotten wrong about American Indians or indigenous people either. I guarantee you that. But no, very honored to be here today. And so I'm going to try to frame for you what the world looks like through an indigenous lens. I said an indigenous lens, not the indigenous lens. There is no the indigenous lens because we've got in North America, the United States, let's just say the United States and Alaska, the contiguous 48 states in Alaska, you know, over 570 federally recognized tribal nations. Alaskan villages, you know, are literally incorporated into corporations, but each village is recognized as its own, with its own tribal identity by the United States government. So incredible diversity. So you can never talk about the indigenous perspective. I'm going to give you an indigenous perspective, and I'm fortunate because having taught at Haskell Indian Nations University now for almost 4 decades, you know, we're the de facto United Nations of indigenous education in North America. Why can I say that? Well, for the last decade, except for the 1.5 years where we closed the campus due to COVID, our enrollment has been 800 students from, you know, always over 40 of the 50 states of the United States. And there hasn't been a single year where we've convened classes in this last decade where we've had fewer than 100 of that 570 federally recognized tribal nations on our campus, 9 months out of the year. There's no place in the world like it. I call it the United Nations of Indigenous Higher Education in the United States. And so we've got people from, you know, Seminoles from Florida, Passamaquoddies from Maine, Yupiks, E-Yupiks from Alaska, Apache, Pueblo, Dene from the Southwest, you know, from the Northwest, Tulalip, Lummi, and then all the tribes from the Great Plains, and all 4 cardinal directions, those sacred directions. We have indigenous people who are from those nations on our campus. So I've been fortunate to kind of say, well, what ties Indigenous people together? So what I'm going to do is kind of encapsulate work I started with probably the greatest, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, who just happened to be a Lakota man, Vine Deloria Jr., who was my friend and mentor and co-author. Really try to give you a quick overview of this idea of what ties Indigenous people together when we think about how they understood the world. So I'm going to give you an Indigenous lens, not the, but I think one that more or less holds pretty true for the vast majority of Indigenous peoples in North America. So let's get started. I'm gonna try to paint you a picture, and then I'm gonna give you something to kind of work on, and then we'll come back together and, you know, try to make sure we all leave here learning something today. I know I'll learn something from you. I always do. So let's start with what Vine Deloria Jr. called, he too had a great intertribal experience, much like mine at Haskell for the last 4 decades. Vine Deloria Jr., author of God is Red, Custer Died for Your Sins, We Talk, You Listen, Red Earth, White Lies, on and on, okay? Over almost 20 books in his lifetime. Vine, through all of his work, came up with what he said, I think this is the basic axiom, if you will. That's my word. He wouldn't use the word. He might say principle of American Indian metaphysics. We've got a foundation. What is it? Power and place equal personality. Now, I know it's kind of one of the verboten words we're not supposed to talk about right now, but we're going to talk about it because you can't talk about Mother Earth without talking about diversity. Mother Earth, the most distinguishing feature of the life on that thin dress she wears called the biosphere, is diverse. It's not a monoculture. It is full of different kinds of ecosystems, different kinds of life systems. And here's the trick. Here's the knowledge that somehow a lot of modern humankind seem to have lost, or maybe they've forgotten, maybe they never knew it. Why do we have such diversity when we talk about indigenous peoples? The Pueblo aren't anything like the Passamaquoddy. And the Passamaquoddy aren't anything like the Seminole. Passamaquoddy are in Maine. The Seminole are in Florida. Okay? Pueblos, Apaches, Dene in the Southwest. Indigenous cultures, our tribal identities, were emergent out of a symbiotic relationship between a specific people and a particular place on the planet. If you do one thing today, one thing, don't let anyone ever try to tell you cultural diversity is about political correctness. Let's presume they're just ignorant. Okay, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But let them know that the cultural diversity of the planet was a function of the biological, the ecological diversity of the planet. My Hawaiian peoples live very differently than my Zoyaha peoples. And yet, in our worldviews, we're all related. The Lakota, Dakota, Nakota speakers, some of you in this audience have heard this phrase before, Mitakue Oyase. I heard it when I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma and extreme southeast Kansas. When I started working at Haskell 40 years ago and had the opportunity to go all over the United States and Alaska to meetings, to symposiums. Every time I'd hear a Lakota or Dakota speaker pray, I'd hear that phrase, Mitakue Oyase. I asked one of my students, Francis Levere, a kid who grew up outside Rapid City, Oglala, Lakota. I came back one time and I said, Francis, can you tell me what that phrase means? This is a long time ago. This story will betray how long ago it was. Because he said, how long are you going to be in your office? I said, oh, I'll be here about another 2 hours. He says, stay right here. I'm going to go to my room. I'm going to bring something back to you. So he goes to his residential hall. About 15 minutes, he comes back. Now, I know it's something we kind of make fun of today, but believe it or not, there was a period not too long ago when people wore a lot of buttons. And he brought back this huge button, okay? And across it, it said, Mitakue Oyase. And the button was that first satellite picture we had of the entire Earth from outer space. We could see our home, where we lived. When they pray and say, Mitakue Oyase, Francis said, we're praying for all of that. Not just our human relatives, all of the life we are related to on this planet. Power plus place equals personality. We're surrounded by power. Delore is no notion of power. I'm not talking about the kind of power they talk about on Wall Street. I'm not talking about the kind of power they talk about in Washington. We're talking the power of creation that surrounds us. That power that resides in that breath, that air, that breath we take when we wake up in the morning, you know, that first breath, conscious breath we take each morning. Of course, we're breathing all night. But when we get up in the morning, that first conscious breath, that's power. And guess what? We didn't have to fill out a credit application to see if we were worthy. Thank God. We're surrounded by gifts. My good friend Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall-Kimmerer. If you haven't seen her new book called The Service Berry, pick it up. She talks about an economy based on gifts, because we're surrounded by gifts. Life is a gift. Power plus place equals personality. Deloria developed that to explain how each of us are unique. There's no one like you in the world, and you're unique because of where you came from and all of these relationships that gave you life, that gave you personality. We live in a very deeply relational world. This is probably one of the key principles you have to understand if you're seeing the world with those indigenous lens I'm talking about. You have to honor all of these relationships. You think about that in your life. You try to be mindful of those relationships. So power plus place equals personality. The first thing we have to grasp when we want to exercise ingenuity is that the best way to do something will depend on where you are. We live increasingly in a world where they want to tell us everything's a one size fits all. Our mother tells us otherwise. The diversity of life on this planet tells us otherwise. And we forgot that. See, we think we should all be the same. And we all should eat the same, dress the same, be the same. Well, I think our planet had a different, I think our mother had a different idea. And that is that all of us are beautiful. And we need to recognize that beauty can best be expressed when we make our lives complementary to the other life we share in that place we call home. So this is one of the exercises we're going to break out and do in a little bit, is I'm going to ask you to think about that deep relationality. That deep relationality. We don't do that enough. So, power plus place equals personality. Power, we now know, by the way, isn't this interesting how modern science is catching up with indigenous wisdom? We now know there's no such thing as empty space. In deepest space, there are these nanoparticles, chemical compounds, there's power. And that's what Delori is talking about. We're surrounded by power. And it's not the kind, again, that we see in Washington or that we see on Wall Street. No. It's the power of life. That's the first point. Place. It gets expressed. That life gets expressed in particular ways depending on where you are on this beautiful blue-green Mother Earth. And because that power gets articulated in different ways, our personalities are unique. And in my work, I took Deloria's formula and said, hey, this not only works for individuals, this applies to peoples, capital P, unique peoples on the planet. I'll say something rather provocative here. It may resonate with you, maybe it won't. But I granted, we have fairly short memories as human beings, many of us. But if you just think about it, everyone in this room has a richer heritage and a much longer genealogical history when you were members of tribes before you became citizens of modern nation states. Nation states are kind of Johnny-come-latelys in terms of human organization. And it's not sure how long they're going to last either, Everyone has a tribal heritage. Some people have just forgotten it and never knew it. Let's stop right there. Power and place. In some of his early writings, he actually formulated it: power plus place equals personality. We can't separate the ecological and biological diversity of the planet from the expressions of our culture and identity as human beings. When we do, things don't turn out very well. Let's stop right there. Any questions? Anyone have a question? Makes sense. Are you rolling that over in your mind? What comes to your mind? A thought, an issue. Yes, sir. We've got a microphone here. So for the crowd, or ma'am, I can't see. You're kind of back in there in the shadows, but I did see your hand come up. So hold on. We've got a microphone coming to you, and that way the people who are online can hear you. Now, raise your hand again. Yeah, there we go. All right.
Thank you. Do I need to press something? Okay.
Just talk. Yeah.
Yeah. Having taught high school for 8 years,
Yes.
my question is about, I heard your language,
Yes.
and I know how specifically in terms of power and place
Yeah.
language is. And in the practical situation of talking to a different generation,
Yes.
I have encountered the problem of the differences when we say the same words, but we don't mean the same thing.
Yes.
And so currently I'm being kind of listening to everything that's going on. I'm wondering what do we do about that problem? Like, we have to somehow put the people together so that they can recognize that what they thought they were talking about, they weren't talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like such a fundamental problem. I don't know what to do.
Yeah. So I think what we do is we need to, this may sound odd, we need to honor that. We need to talk about that. By the way, if you're not familiar with Vine Deloria's work, we really kind of hit the high mark in American Indian literature and publishing in 1969. In Scott Momaday was on the New York Times bestseller list with Housemaid of Dawn, and Vine Deloria Jr. was on the New York Times bestseller list with Custer Died for Your Sins. Look at those books. They're very different. But the point both of them make is the 500-year collision, 5 centuries old collision of cultures is basically one of miscommunication and misunderstanding. When we say land, we're not talking about real estate. When we say ceremony, we're not talking about theology. And when we say sovereignty, we're not talking about state power. And yet we use those words, and then we think we're understanding each other, but they mean different things. To me, this is the most critical thing that we need to discuss. And this is why I think foreign language instruction, again, talk about taking a step backwards. I mean, those who think there should only be one official language in this country. If we want to really honor the history of this place, we'd be teaching dozens of languages, right? Of the people of this place, the first peoples of this place. But I think the way you deal with that is you use that as an opportunity to talk to students about why it's different, why people here and here might have two different interpretations of that same word, or why when you try to do a translation. Now, we talk about this all the time at Haskell because we have so many tribes represented. And often I will have students who they'll just be very blunt and say, well, we don't really have a word for that. I give you two obvious examples. There are very few tribal peoples who have a word for nature. Think about that. it's hard to name something that's not you. You're you. You're all natural. And I hate to break the news to you, but you're all animals too. You're beautiful animals. Now, wow, we're getting already into some weird metaphysics here. So why is it so horrible to be called an animal? Oh, you're just an animal. Oh, because if you're an animal, you're not civilized. You're wild. You're a wildcat. Okay, it's a teachable moment. I'm going to give you a citation. I'm sorry. This is what I do. If you've never read Kirkpatrick Sale's work, The Conquest of Paradise, came out in 1991. Kirkpatrick Sale, S-A-L-E. Grab it, read his book. He went through and did a thorough examination of Cristobal Colon, Christopher Columbus's diaries, his ship logs that he wrote. And what he does is produce a marvelous view of not just where Columbus thought he was going, but describing the world Cristobal Colon left. See, we never talk about that. So what was the worldview Cristobal Colon was carrying with us? It's a pretty incredible read. Sale makes the argument, you know what? Don't be protesting Cristobal Colon or Christopher Columbus, because any fairly learned European, okay, in the late 15th century, who had come here would have thought the same way he did. They had a fairly modern worldview already emerging. It's a fascinating read. Power and place equals personality. Ma'am, did that help you at all in terms of your question?
I think so, especially your use of the word, how it relates, like it's an example, how
Yeah.
it relates to metaphysics.
Yeah.
But those differences are power in place, creating different relationships through the physics that stands behind
Yes.
the, the ground from
Mhm.
which we pull out our language.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Doctor-
Yes, sir.
Yes, Dr. Dan. So we have Descartes that says, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
And it's a very individualistic
Yeah.
experience. We have the great books of the Western world with
Mhm.
all kinds of ideas. But I sense, and I'm totally ignorant of the indigenous as being more of an experience
Mhm.
matter with, the smoke,
Mhm.
the dancing, the experience or whatever.
Mhm.
But I don't see, is there a chance to read what that religious
Mhm.
nature is of indigenous people,
Mhm.
or is it totally just experiential?
Mhm. Mhm. So you're fortunate. There are people like myself now who are indigenous people who are writing. If you aren't familiar with Robin Wall Kimmerer's work, look at her work. And if I haven't totally put you off, in a couple hours, I've got the book I mentioned where Deloria unveils Power and Place Equals Personality. The book Vine, Deloria, and I wrote together called Power and Place, Indian Education in America. I've got about 4 copies of that, and then I've got the book that I followed up with about 8 years later, Red Alert, Saving the Planet with Indigenous Knowledge. And then I've got my newest book on Indigenuity. And I'm talking about all the stuff that I'm kind of laying out here, okay? So power and place equals personality. Let's move on now, because I'm going to make really 3 very quick points, okay? And then we can open it up for questions, and then I'm gonna ask you to kind of self-organize into maybe at least 6 groups, and we can put, like, you know, one group kind of get in one corner, each of the corners, and then a group in the middle here and there in the back, okay? And give you something to kind of talk about and work on. So power in place equals personality. That was Deloria's, I call it that axiom for his view of indigenous North American metaphysics. Now, something comes deeply out of this immediately deeply relational feature. And again, it's surprising to me that we don't teach this in science. With Watson and Crick's discovery of DNA and the recombinant processes, okay, of DNA, it's become very clear Lakota and Nakota speakers were right. We are all related. The grass, the plants, the animals, we're related. That's pretty radical. And yet, we still talk about all of that outside these walls as resources. Point 2. I know that it's going to be hard to kind of live in the modern world and not think about natural resources, or at least use those words when you're talking to people. But change your thinking right now, because that's a miseducative terminology. We don't live among natural resources. We live among natural relatives. Think about that. Let that soak in just a minute. We live among natural relatives. The earth, the air, the water is full of life, and we are related. Now, that second point has a complementary principle then that I think is we need to desperately think through right now in the environment we're living in. I don't know what it's like in your family, but in my family, if the only time you ever show up is when your hand's out, and that auntie or uncle can see you coming up that dirt road, they're going to close all the blinds, lock the doors, and act like no one's at home. Because they're not ATM machines, and they don't want to be treated that way. The complementary principle to leaving behind the miseducative idea that we live in a world full of resources to one that says we live in a world full of relatives. I don't argue about who has the right to my grandma or my grandpa when they were alive, or my aunties or my uncles, but I do think about responsibilities I have. Indigenous governance honors inalienable rights, but it sees those as literally groundless unless coupled with unalienable responsibilities, because you now live in a world full of relatives. When was the last time you heard a politician get up and talk about our unalienable responsibilities as human beings? Boy, I'm living to see that day. I hope I'm living to see that day. I'm getting pretty long in the tooth, but I'm holding out, you know. That would be a wonderful thing to get someone up and talk about, hey, let's talk about what our inalienable or unalienable responsibilities are to this larger kinship system we are a part of, full of relatives. So we started with the axiom. We went to a second point. Let's walk away from this miseducative idea of living in a world full of natural resources and embrace a world full of natural relatives. And when we do that, think of all the benefits this would have. Think of what would it look like if we started changing our discussion about the water, the air, the land, the plants and animals, of one that is no longer preoccupied with who has the right to use this or that, but instead, what are our responsibilities to the water? Vine Delory was pretty skeptical of direct action when he was alive. He lived through the American Indian movement, the Red Power movement. He started his journey to the stars way, way too soon. And he did not live to see Standing Rock. But I kind of think Standing Rock would have given him, probably is right now. He's probably just, this guy chain smoked Pall Malls, unfiltered Pall Malls. That didn't kill him, but interestingly enough, that's not what killed him. But he always had a Pall Mall, and I can see him right now. He's probably saying, okay, folks, look out. Watch that Wildcat, I think he would have liked the fact that the women, the mothers, and the grandmothers, by the way, you guys all know it was women who started Standing Rock. It was women, it was mothers, it was aunties, it was grandmothers who set up Sacred Stone Camp. And then everyone came. But I think Deloria would have loved the fact that the women would not let the press label them as protesters. What did they say they were? Water protectors. That's what we're doing here. We're protecting the water. And why did they tell you why? Water is life. Responsibilities. Responsibilities that some people don't recognize anymore because we live with such comfort and convenience in this world full of resources, particularly if you have a lot of them, that you don't need to think about responsibilities. Well, see the problem. You're very mistaken. So here's the last story, the fourth point I'm going to make, and I'm going to do it by way of a story, and then I'm going to give you guys a project, a little assignment. It'll be fun. It's not going to be heavy lifting at all. I hope you'll find it fun. That's what the professors always say, right? When they give you an onerous task to do. Oh, you guys are really going to like this, And they're going like, oh my God. Anyway, so I was at White Mountain Apache about a long time ago. I think it was one of the first intertribal GIS meetings. GIS was a big deal in the early 90s. It was a tool that was finally being kind of spread out, popularized, and a lot of tribes were being introduced to geographic information systems. I went to a meeting at White Mountain Apache, a room about this size, the Intertribal GIS Council. So a lot of people from tribes. And as you might expect, it was kind of the techies, it was the technical guys, the guys who worked with natural resources, planning with the tribes, and they wanted to hear about this new technology and tool. So for 2 days on a stage like this, they had panels and presentations and PowerPoints talking about this powerful tool. And I noticed late the first day, there was one guy sitting right kind of in the middle, and he was older, and he really wasn't dressed like those techies. I mean, he looked to me like he's probably a local, beat up cowboy hat. He dressed the part, you know, a jean jacket, some blue jeans, some boots. And he just sat there. Never asked a question or anything, but he was really attentive. I mean, I could see him that whole time. So the afternoon of the second day, getting ready to end, and we've got a panel, right? And the panel's all these younger Native folk, really excited about the technology. And then the moderator said, does anyone have a question? And I saw that old man put up his hand. I thought, uh-oh, this is going to be interesting. I said, this guy's going to be Coyote, or I had just had this feeling he's going to, you know, say something that I needed to pay attention to. He didn't fail me either. So he raises his hand and the moderator says, yes, sir, what's your question? He says, well, I've been listening to this talk about this technology now for 2 days. And he said, I've just got one question. Can any of you tell me the relationship of this technology to the natural law? And oh man, it was, you know, you could just see everyone going like, what the heck is the natural law? What is this old guy talking about? So they did what we all do when we're put in a spot publicly and can't answer the question. Sir, would you please repeat that question? Repeat that question. I don't think we understood what you said. Well, that was his cue. That was his cue. He stood up and he said, you know, this technology could be a powerful tool, but no one has really talked about its relationship, its importance to the natural law. And he says, there is a natural law. And he said, that law is the land, the air, and the water. God, I've thought about that so often. Ever since I heard that, I thought, man, I'd love to make a K-12 curriculum teaching earth science, teaching environmental science. He says it's all about the land, the air, and the water. That's the natural law, because humans and the other life on this planet, if you don't respect the land, the air, and the water, you are going to pay a penalty. He says, if your actions are egregious enough, damaging, disrespectful enough, you might even get the death penalty. Man, I mean, you could have dropped a pin in that room. And I thought about that. I hold that close, that piece of wisdom. I never got his name. I wish I could honor him by saying his name for that piece of wisdom. The natural law, the land, the air, and the water, all life on the planet must respect that law. And if you don't, you're going to pay a price. I think we're paying the price right now. What's the point? We talk a lot about resilience. My fourth point, okay? We talk a lot about resilience. Resilience resides in an indigenuity, indigenous ingenuity that recognizes there is much knowledge and wisdom outside these walls with the land, the air, the water, the plants, and the animals. But you got to pay attention to learn them. You have to live mindfully. And that's what resilience is. Real resilience is honoring that deep relationality that we are a part of in this world. A world full of relatives, not resources. A world that asks us to seriously consider what our responsibilities are and recognize the beautiful part is we don't have to do it alone. Why do we find that some of our children who've been in horrible situations, sometimes not treated well by human relatives, why do we find the best therapies for them are getting them out of doors? The Northern tribes have developed whole programs where they work with some of the children who have really been hurt by having them work with horses. And they learn love, not through a human relationship, but through that care and that respect that that horse shows them, that reciprocity. We do the same thing in gardening. I spent after breakfast this morning, I spent an hour out weeding, and my neighbor walked by and said something like, "Well, Dan, I'm sure glad you're getting out and doing that," kind of like it was an onerous task. And I said, "You know what?" I said, I'm always thinking big things and ideas all week. I said, "This is really therapy for me." I said, "Just sitting on the earth, pulling weeds, it feels good." And after all, those weeds are life, they're relatives, they're plants. Just because they get in places we don't want them doesn't mean we shouldn't have some respect. So, any questions? I went over 4 points fairly quickly. Yeah.
I understand how all living things
Yes.
are relative, but can you explain how things like the forces of wind and water and rocks, they're not alive to me in the same way.
Yeah.
So how can you explain why how they're
Oh,
relative?
so repeat the question just very briefly.
When you say relatives, I think of living things,
Right.
plants and animals, but
Mhm.
you're also talking about wind and water, forces and rocks. And
Mhm.
so I'm just asking, can you explain how those are relatives?
Yeah. So the idea of relatives is really not just a material, or it's not exclusively a biological kind of connection. It's a connection that really has to do with this fact that, we really don't understand a lot about how consciousness works. We kind of, we got neuroscientists who are working a lot with the brain, but we say, oh, well, that plant can't think, or that rock can't think. But we're related because some of the chemicals that are in that rock, to take a most basic example, we're all part carbon. And carbon connects us, relates us. So this idea of a relative and kinship operates at 2 levels. For some tribes, it's a very, I'm going to use the word spiritual because I don't know another way to kind of describe it, but the notion that even in the rock, there is a power there in that rock. There are tribes that hold certain specific kinds of stones as sacred, and this is because of this idea of the power of that rock. So if you translate power to life, not a biological notion, but a more, and again, I'm going to use a word that I think will resonate with you all, a kind of a more spiritual kind of notion that life resides in that material, even though it may be inanimate, and that power resides there. And we don't know what the rock thinks. So I got to tell a little story here. This was from a Pueblo elder who I heard give this story. I'll give you his name because I don't think he would mind. And he's unfortunately started his journey to the stars. His name is Alfonso Ortiz. He wrote a very famous book called Tewa Worldview. And he talked about the power of rocks. And it was a group about 20 American Indian graduate students. We were in a seminar together, and it was just marvelous. And he made this comment about rocks, and I loved it, because one of the students raised up their hands, and she was Native, and she said, well, I'm having a hard time with this, Dr. Ortiz, because, you know, I live around rocks, and the rocks have never talked to me. And you know, she was being very honest. That was great, very honest. And I loved his response. And he was quite serious. He just looked at her and said, have you ever stopped to listen? Now, you can take that however you want to. But I think that's the sense in which I would say it's not idiosyncratic. Many indigenous people seem to extend kinship, yes, to even inanimate features of the natural world. Of course, we know the air carries life in it, and of course for water that's easier to explain. And the soil, healthy soil is full of billions of microbes. In fact, E.O. Wilson, the famous, ecologist and biologist, said, when it comes to species, he said, we have millions of forms of life we still have not even named, and they're the microbes in the soil. The variety there, he says, is off the charts. The soil is alive. So when we say Mother Earth, we literally mean it's living. Think about that. Great question, though. Thank you. I hope that helps a little bit. Okay. Yes. Let's see, microphone. And then we're going to probably have to break out here I do want you guys to have an opportunity to talk amongst yourselves and work on something here for a second. This time goes very quickly.
Yeah, sure does. Hi, thank you, Dr. Wildcat, for being here. This is great. So I heard our relatives, our responsibilities, our natural law, and resilience.
Yeah.
Natural law, that comes.
Land, air, water.
So earlier when you were talking, I kept thinking, oh, the polluter pays. And then when you said natural law, you said land, air, and water. And then I thought, oh, physics. And so can you help me with my legalisms in this? Try to distinguish natural law from like God-given law. And
Yeah. So again, here would be, and I'm going to go back to your comment and question. Okay, now this is just to make an illustration. We often do comparative things, right? And sometimes we think those comparisons are like real. They're not. Those are intellectual tools we use. So the world's much more muddy than saying either or, black or white, right? We all know that. And so I'm going to use a comparison to kind of answer your question. I think, and there are certainly in the Western tradition, religious and spiritual traditions which would honor this. But I think the idea that I would like to emphasize among many of the tribes, and I'm not even going to, I'm just going to say many. This is a very mild generalization, okay? And it's just a generalization, okay? It doesn't mean it applies to everyone. A generalization is just that. It means generally speaking. I think one of the things that's interesting, because we have this discussion a lot in my classes when we get into topics of religions or spirituality. Many tribes will use the term grandfather or grandfathers when they pray. They're not thinking of that image of God that's painted on the Sistine Chapel. It's not some man with a long beard and long white hair who's kind of like the Superman of all creation. And then, we're made in his image, right? In a Judeo-Christian tradition. I think in many tribal traditions, the sacred, without naming a person or thinking of the sacred as a person, the sacred is creation. It resides in the life, the mystery around us, and is deeply experiential. So you don't need a theology. In fact, I talk about this a lot in my classes, and my students always nod their head. They seem to agree. We've never had a religious war among tribes in the United States. That's something to be proud of. We'd go to battle if you stole our ponies overnight or took some of our women, okay? But we've never had a religious war over, hey, you're not praying the right way, or you don't have the right God. Because we understood that the power of place, the way that the sacred and divine reveals itself, will be different for people in different places on the planet. Wes Jackson, some of you in this audience will recognize that name, the Land Institute. I did a presentation with him, oh my God, 25 years ago. And Wes had this great story. He said, he says, I've heard it told that, this idea of God or the sacred, whatever that higher power is, he says, it's like the top of a mountain. And he says, but if you go around the base of the mountain, there are many different peoples. And they all follow a different path to get in touch with that power at the top. Now, here's where we would have a fundamental disagreement. There is no top. This isn't a hierarchical arrangement. It's a living system we're a part of. It's a kinship system. It's a family. And I think that's where the idea of natural law is very different. It reveals itself, if we're mindful and paying attention, in our living, in our lives. I had Crosland. See, this is the problem with your questions, because I just want to tell stories. Okay, and stories take a while to tell. But I'm going to tell one more story. So Benny Smith was a beautiful human being, Cherokee man. He was one of our dean of students back when I first got to Haskell in the 80s. And he had a brother who just started his journey to the stars. We just lost him right before Christmas. Crosland Smith. Anyone in here? Crosland was, some people in Kansas City, I knew Crosland. Crosland Smith, he's a very well-regarded Kituwa Cherokee elder. And in popular parlance, medicine man. I went to Washington, D.C. in the early 90s to do a program. And Now, remember, when you're out here in, quote, what we call Indian country, we think of all those Indians that work in the BIA as the guys in suits, who sometimes we wonder if they really have our interest in mind, you know, our right interest in mind. So you're kind of always skeptical of those guys working in DC. But I went there with a program and I had invited Crosland to come. And all of a sudden, I noticed, I was down in the lobby, I saw all of these BIA officials, Indians, in their suits. Man, they were dressed slick in their suits. And they were going up to the front desk and they were saying, can you tell me where Crosland Smith's room is? I talked to Crosland right before we left. And I said, man, I noticed you got a lot of friends in BIA. And he said, well, I came to town and they found out about it. And he used to do what he would call readings. So he was a medicine person. People would come to him with their ailments, with their problems, and he'd just sit, listen to them, and talk to them. Okay? And it just really made me realize, holy, you know, man, have I stereotyped? I mean, here are these officials in their three-piece suits. They're really connected. And they found out Crosland's in town, and they were coming to see him so that he might work with them. And that was pretty incredible. It was eye-opening. But that was a little bit about Crosland. Crosland came up to see his brother one time, and his brother said, I want you to go talk to Dan. And I was a young dean at the time, and I was being very challenged, being a young dean. And I realized that what Benny was doing was setting me up so Crosland could do a reading with me. I didn't ask for it. I was too stupid to ask for a reading at that time. But he said, Crosland, I want you to go see Dan. And Crosland said, okay, can you come out to campus early? And my brother said, I need to meet you. I talked to him for about 15 minutes and he said, well, it sounds to me like you're really having a lot of challenges. I said, yeah, I am. And anyway, and so he helped me. What did he say? He said, well, you know, he says, I know your people probably did this too, but he said, in Cherokee traditions, the first thing we do in the morning when we take that first breath, conscious breath of air, is we go to water. We need water, right, to cook. Don't turn on the faucet because there was no faucet to turn on. You go to the creek, you go to the stream, you go to the lake, you go to water. And he says, and when we go to water, he says, we wash our face and we honor the four directions and we give thanks to that water. And he says, this is what I want you to do. He says, every morning, he says, I know you're not going to go down to the Kansas River. He says, but when you get up in that morning and wash your face, he says, give thanks to the water. And I try to do that every morning. Now, see, this is weird because I asked my students, I said, so when you take that shower in the morning or turn on that faucet, do any of you ever thank the water? And they all look at me and go like, what do you mean, thank the water? And I said, thank the water. See, that convenience makes us not pay attention. That water is life. If you didn't have it, you'd be worried. And let's remember, we have a lot of our human kin on the planet who this is their primary thought every day. Will I have water? That's what they're thinking about. And do they respect water? Yes, they do. And instead, we get a little dust on our car and go spray it down. We're rich. We can do that. And it's not a scarce resource yet. See, that's the resource. We're just using a resource. Now, I had that lesson reinforced me when I went to the barrier island of Shishmarov in Alaska about a year ago, well, about a year and 4 months ago. I went there in October of 24. It's kind of like the poster child for climate change. That's the very shallow barrier island in the Chukchi Sea, where the pictures 10 years ago where their houses being washed into the ocean. That was the island of Shishmara. And I visited there. And a case of water at Costco in Anchorage is about $1 more than here. You get a case of those plastic bottles of water for $7.50, $8. When we get to Nome, that same case, you got to fly to Nome to fly to Shishmaref. That same case of water was $33. Yeah, the $8 case of Costco water. When you get to the island of Shishmaref, when we got there a little early and my host said, hey, Dan, why don't you go check out the community store? Dr. Paulette Blanchard, a Shawnee woman, was one of my co-investigators on this big project I'm leading. I said, let's go over to the community store and check it out. So we did. And then I thought, oh, I want to go look at the water. How much? That same case of water on the barrier island of Shishmaref, $53, because they don't have potable water on the island. It's very precious. And so the grandma who we were staying with saw a half empty plastic bottle of water, and she says, put a lid on that and save that. I'm going to throw that out. Okay. I came back from that trip and told my wife, I'm never washing our cars again. I said, water's too precious. And it's been, 16 months and I haven't done it. I'm not washing my car ever again. The water's too precious. You know. Okay. Great questions. And we've gone way too long, but now let's kind of break it up. Okay. So here's what we've got. I think we can manage this. I'm going to just ask you to self-organize about, let's see how many, it looks like maybe we've got a little over 50, maybe 50 people in here, something like that. Let's try to do 5 groups. And I'm going to ask you guys just to move to an area. So I want to get a group in that corner, okay? About 10 or 12 people. Just go to that corner. You can come from over here, go over there, and get in your corners. And now I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, okay? I want a group right here, okay, in that corner, a group in this corner, a group up here, right here, get up here, and then a group right here in the middle, okay? So, and I know it's kind of awkward. You can kind of have, someone's going to have to kind of turn around and look at each other. You can stand, whatever you want to do. But let's try to get them fairly evenly distributed with numbers. So let's get about 10 or 12 people back there. We need some more back here in this corner. Go on back there. Okay? Maybe another person over here. This group up here is looking pretty good. We got to get... Okay, and I need some people right up here, right in the center, right here, okay? Now, if you'll here, let me have that, or I don't think we'll need that. I'll give the instructions if you'll pass those around. So we're going to give you some big pads to write on. Yeah, we need a few more here. Come on over here. Over here, ladies, right here. We got to have a good group here. Okay, cool. Okay. Okay, now this is going to be really easy. It's not, and it's really important. I didn't want to even give you the instructions till you get in groups. Everyone take some paper and a marker. We'll need one person who can kind of write down. Yeah, one per group. Yeah, everyone get a marker. Okay? And I think these will stick on the wall. We got the sticky ones, so find a wall where you can just stick it. Yeah, okay? And you can just lay it up here or, yeah, wherever you want to. Okay, so what a scientist would say, okay, we're making a data plot. We're not worried about data. This is a word plot, okay? So everyone in your group, the first group of points we're going to have, and you can't be wrong, right? It's your answer. It's what's up here. It's what's in here. Write the first word. You can't be wrong. It's yours. That comes to mind when I say land.